What would it be like to be queen of your own life? When I think of a queen, I think of someone high on a throne, but a true queen understands her people and is with her people and knows how to build an empire most effectively. Of course, this applies to kings too. Kimberly Spencer is the founder of Crown Yourself and has faced a number of major obstacles in her life that have shaped her and empowered her to help others build their empire, whether in business or in life, with their own zone of genius. She's been a successful business owner and a real Miss Congeniality that is just a delight. So stay tuned for our interview. This podcast is brought to you by DJ Works Media with resources and ideas for you at mid-career or half-time of life. Check out our online courses where we want you to not only start, but finish. Books available in all versions and songs available for immediate download with sheet music and instrumental accompaniment tracks. Our musicals are family-friendly with great music that's memorable and inspiring. Sign up at goalsforyourlife.com/newsletter for weekly updates. Now to our episode. Well, I'm so excited to have Kimberly Spencer, beautiful Kimberly Spencer, and she is all about this crowning yourself and making yourself, I don't know. I'm going to let you explain all of that because I read everything about this, but I think it's wonderful to hear from my guests. And thank you for being with us, first of all, Kimberly.
Absolutely. I am so honored to be here and so excited, Deborah. I think what it means to crown yourself is if you think of a queen, right, or a king or a sovereign, they are born literally with the belief that they are destined to be a leader, and not only like any leader, but like to lead a country or sovereign nations or a commonwealth, like to lead a significant portion of people. And so they're born with this belief that that's what they're doing. And then they have mentors and people that surround them that also facilitate buying into this belief. Well, so often as we're born and we have dreams and we have ideas and we have things that we want to do and accomplish. And one of my favorite questions to ask my clients is, who did you want to be when you were about 4, 5, 6 years old? Because right then it's like untainted as far as who you are beyond what the society is going to bring to you.
Right.
And in that space, like, and then as you grow older, like then people project their insecurities, their own failures, their own challenges, their struggles onto you. And that's just quote unquote how life is. And that dream is so great that you want to be an astronaut, but I mean, really only 500 people have been to space and like all of those projections of jadedness of their own failure onto a child. And so a child starts to adopt these belief systems as they go along. Maybe not at first. Like I remember when I was 16 years old and I was a screenwriter and I had won an award for my first screenplay and I was so excited and I got to be mentored by a professional screenwriter in Hollywood. And I get to this meeting of screenwriters and their mentees, and I'm there at the donut stand because there was always a donut stand, and this screenwriter who was in his mid 40s was standing there, and I was like, "Hi, I'm so excited! Like we're going to be writing movies!" Like total Elle Woods moment, like absolutely Elle Woods at going to Harvard moment. And he goes, "Yeah, when you have that excitement in 40 years, like let me know." And I was like,
"Wow!"
I was like, I'm sorry. Like in my mind, it didn't make sense to me that if I didn't have the same enthusiasm or the excitement or the love or the passion for what I was doing, well, why would I stay in the same career? Like, wouldn't I pivot? And I ended up, like, after my first feature film was produced and distributed, picked up by Lionsgate, I pivoted. I pivoted into having an e-commerce company for 2 years. And then from there, after I was bought out of that company, I pivoted into having my coaching business and Crown Yourself. And Crown Yourself really is, what is the environment that's setting you up for success, both the internal environment that you have and the stories that you have going on in your mind, and the environment that you're surrounding yourself with, which is why I love going on podcasts like yours, Deborah, because what you are doing is you are providing people with access to a new environment to expand their potential for possibility.
Right. Well, you came from such a background, though, too. And a lot of times when you come from this background, I mean, you had some tough stuff growing up. I mean, and you pulled yourself out. And a lot of people have a hard time pulling themselves out. But I usually work with people at mid-career, half-time of life. So they're now making some changes, but it gets harder and harder when you get comfortable. And now you're going, oh, whoa. So talk about, how did you even get to the point of writing, a screenplay? Because you came from some adversity. So talk just briefly about that, so people know, like, oh, okay, she did have to go through some stuff. She wasn't born with this silver spoon in her mouth of saying, now I'm a queen, I'm 5 and I'm just going to keep going and I'm just going to keep going. That's different. Yeah. You've come through some tough stuff. So give us just a little bit of that background. And then I want to kind of move into that. You talk about, you've got a lot of quotes that you use, these Zone of Genius, Plagiarized program. I want to hear about some of those, but I want people to really know a little bit of the real Kimberly and what you came from, and then kind of how you made that little switch.
So I was the only child of my parents, and I grew up with phenomenal parents in that they always believed in me, and they always believed anything was possible for me. They always supported my dreams. Challenging, on the other hand, because my dad was a highly functioning addict. And I watched them over the course of growing up, then like starting out from nothing, building a multi-million-dollar business within 30 years. However, for those first few years of my life, like, my dad was heavily drinking. And I'm very grateful now that he's passed, I had the reflection that the time that was most challenging and most abusive was really after his parents had passed. Wow. And he too had very complex relationship with his parents. And I could only imagine, like, I was pregnant with my second son when my father passed, and there's a lot of complex emotions. There's, the sadness that the person's gone. There's also the sadness for the hope of what could have been, of the possibility. And there's also the freedom, which sometimes can also be coupled with guilt of, like, I'm really glad this person isn't in my life anymore. And so it's a complex set of emotions. And so my dad was processing that with the only resource that he had back then, which was alcohol and pot. And I always say I had 4 different dads. So I had the one sober dad, was amazing. Just like, I remember one time my husband was actually having a conversation with my father when he was sober, and he was like, who was that? Like, never met that man. But when my dad was an alcoholic, like when he was drinking, he was an asshole. And that was when he was the most abusive. And I saw him get taken away to jail. Like, he was emotionally abusive, but he also was sexually abusive. Like, it was challenging in that space. And eventually, fast forward 20 years later, I staged his intervention. And I was very, very grateful, because the last 4 years of his life, he was completely sober off of alcohol. And wow. I got to have my dad in my life and then see him be a grandpa to my first son, which was really just very, very healing, because my father really struggled with forgiving himself for some of the things that he did when I was a child. Wow. And I'm so grateful for that experience, because I got to choosing my dad, because I think sometimes we're born to the families that allow us to grow. Like, it taught me to suppress emotion. It taught me that emotions were bad, and I was born a big feeling child. And I think that our kids are sometimes the gifts that allow us to see parts of ourselves that maybe we have hidden or shrouded. Oh, yeah. And I was the one that brought out the emotion. And my mom's the type that she likes to, like, bury her head in the sand and not see emotion. And my dad was the type that would escape it. And so I modeled some very poor behavior. Like, I ended up developing an eating disorder at the age of 11 for 10 years, where I struggled with bulimia because that was my way of coping. Because especially when you're growing up in a environment with an addict, it's constant chaos. I never knew which father was going to walk home, and for the one that was the alcoholic, I knew I had to protect myself. And so the growing up in those circumstances, it shakes your foundation of what you believe is normal and what you believe is safe and what you believe is good and right. And from that space, I compensated with bulimia, and I compensated with being an achiever, of how, like, maybe if I just was skinny enough, maybe if I got good enough grades, maybe it's all of the enoughnesses, like maybe then the behavior would change. And it wasn't until I moved out of my family's home, I started my first business as a Pilates instructor at 19 to support myself as a screenwriter. And
that's what you do. That is what you do.
Job. And from that space, though, I changed my environment, which allowed me to start really assessing, like, what are the behaviors that actually are conducive for what I want and what I say I want, and what are the behaviors that actually are leading me down a dark path. And I always tell my clients, like, you cannot heal in the environment that made you sick. And sometimes that's not just the environment of, like, because we can't all just move away from our families.
Right.
But we can choose, like, how we're surrounding ourselves and who we're surrounding ourselves. And so as I started to teach more Pilates, I started to realize, A, I'm not alone in all the feelings that I felt. B, there are much more opportunities and stories that we have available to us, but it just requires us being exposed to them. So I got to listen, because as you're teaching people exercise, they kind of share their stories and their lives with you. I got to listen to belief systems constantly. And I started to see this dichotomy of behavior and seeing the key one is results. Did this person have a life that I wanted to model? Like, and I remember this one woman I trained, Barbara Converse, I'm just so grateful to her, because she modeled a successful, thriving marriage. And I was like, I still remember her to this day, nearly 16, 17 years after training her, because the conversations we had about marriage, I was like, oh, that could be possible for me. I didn't know that not having chaos in a relationship was possible. And the same was true with productivity. I had two clients that one was a stay-at-home single mom. Her kids were older. They had their own cars. She was fully supported by her ex-husband. And she was the most stressed out human I've still to this day ever met in my entire life. Like, and she had a stress belly. Like, she just retained that stress and was, like, super tight and rigid. And on the other hand, I had this really successful lawyer who would come and work with me at like 9:00 at night. She was pregnant with her third child, just made partner in a giant law firm. And I asked them both, I saw their construct of what they constituted as busy and what their lives were. And I got curious and I started asking questions. And I saw that one believed that busy was obsessing over the PTA napkins at her kids' private school's dinner. And the other one believed that purpose was really in her work and how she showed up as a parent. And I got to see, wow, these are two different people with two different belief systems. Can you possibly choose who you are instead of who you have been trained to be? And it was through that and through teaching Pilates, and also the Pilates in and of itself, which regulates your nervous system, which is incredibly essential for healing the environment of your body if you've been in a high stress situation. That those pieces allowed me to transform and heal with no psychological or medical intervention from a 10-year battle with an eating disorder. And then I took those resources and I applied them to my relationships. And then later I applied them to my business when I caught myself in a negative business mindset as well, that then allowed me to heal and scale and grow my coaching business.
Your story is this is why I wanted you to share it, because people talk about their businesses and what they're doing and everything, but it's all about the story, about where you came from, because it's so relatable. I will guarantee you, there's some listener that's going, oh, I didn't know there was any hope. And when they've come from some sort of background that they're still struggling with, because I talk about the roundabout, getting caught in a roundabout, that's what Stop Circling, the book is all about that I wrote. But people are circling, they can't seem to get out, or they get out and they come back in. They just keep coming, they keep circling. And it's so very important to be able to have, some people in your life or some sort of program, something that will help push you forward. And you have done that. And you had mentors as well. And this is really where I talk to a lot of people at mid-career, halftime of life, who are not using those skills, not using the resources, not using that experience. Oh, for those of you who are not doing that, there are so many opportunities to be a mentor and to help these, people, men and women, going through these stages, and that's why I bring my husband on once a month with our podcast, because we've been married for over 40 years. We are, we're kind of a dying breed, hopefully not, but, but it's the experience that you have, learn from these people, learn from their relationship, learn from, the struggles that they've had, because it's not been easy. I tell you, there's a lot. I tell my kids now as they're going through their relationship, it's like this. There is just a certain amount that you major on the majors and you get through it. You make sure that you communicate and stop the hurling at each other. You just, all of those things. So you even learned that from people that you were in Pilates with, and you go, oh, I want that. I think that's a possibility. But you are real because you've come from, that abusive background, the parents that you've had to deal with, different things in your life. So, but then you've also learned from other people. So let's talk about this zone of genius. Now, you've talked a lot about being able to kind of lift yourself up in confidence and where, that we all have that ability, but talk about the zone of genius. And I really want to hear about this plagiarized programming, because I am so much against plagiarism as a content creator. I just got my 3rd trademark and I have a lot of intellectual property. So, but that's very important to me, with that sort of thing. But I think you have a whole different twist on it. So talk about your zone of genius and then your plagiarized programming.
So zone of genius is really that area that of your skill set, your unique, I like to say divinely given skill set that you just naturally do. For example, and you kind of know this when you're like 4, 5, 6 years old.
Right.
So my son naturally gifted at math. Loves it. Like his favorite place to go is mathnasium. Like he loves math. And that's part of his zone of genius, where he just has this he also has a natural magnetism of just bringing people in. When we lived in Australia during the pandemic, because we were that family that was stuck in a foreign country.
Oh, yes.
and for 2 years.
Yes.
Couldn't get back. And my son, I like to say he was our ambassador of friendship, because he would just be like, hey, how are you? Just super effervescent. Really gregarious. And then, he turned around like, who is that?
Oh, that's so cute. That is so cute.
But we would build relationships because he was so beautifully outgoing. And that's kind of just, and one of the things I just love is he's so naturally just him. He just does what he does.
Yes.
And those are things that I would never want to take away from him by forcing upon him my version of what I think a boy should be, or what I think my son should be. And that's why I call it plagiarized programming. So your genius zone is really that space that you could live and work in for free. Like for me, one of my genius zones is in creating and in connecting. Like I am a professional dot connector. Like that's what I do with my clients. I see and I recognize patterns that they can't even see. I see their vision happen before they even manifest it. And I see the synchronicities of like, oh, you've already got these follow-ups and these things that are happening in your business and in your life. Like, of course your next goal is happening. Like this is how one of my clients who she achieved her 1-year goal of $4 million in bids in 3 months working with me, because she was able to suddenly she started to see these dots and these connections.
Right. Right.
And that's the power of having like a coach and having guides and having mentors like
Of
yourself,
course it is.
Deborah.
Yes.
And so that's part of my genius zone. And the other part is in creating. Like I just express myself in words, writing. I've always identified as a writer. I've always been a storyteller. I love writing stories. When I was a kid, I was creating stories and I was building these little worlds. And that's now what I get to do as a coach is I get to step into people's worlds and I get to see what they want to create and I help them co-create it together. And so looking at your zone of genius, what is that thing that you do so well? And this is where it gets finicky, right? Because we have our zone of genius, but then we also have that zone of excellence. And that zone of excellence is typically what you've climbed up the corporate ladder with. It's typically that skill set that you can do really well. Like I can do systems creation like nobody's business. But that's not my genius zone. Like I remember when I first started my coaching business and I still was a little doubtful of my skill set as a coach and what I brought to the table. And so I said, oh, in addition to the coaching, I'll help you establish a personal brand and I'll build your website and I'll do some social media for you. And I can do that. Like it's fine.
Really? Oh, that's a great offer. Yeah.
And not
build
surprisingly,
oh yeah.
Yeah, build a website. I could Squarespace it up in a weekend. The problem was that you will know what your zone of genius is by how you feel after being in it. Like I know if I'm currently, this is podcast interview number 5 today. And I am still on excited and happy to be here and sharing the space and connecting with you just as much as I was on interview 1 versus website design. I would be like, like really try, like really like downing the coffee to try to maintain my energy. So you will know what your zone of excellence is by how you feel afterward, by that energy and being able to discern your energy. If it's life-giving, if it gives you energy, that's a sign that you're in your zone of genius. And the problem is because of plagiarized programming, which to touch on, since you wanted to touch on plagiarized programming is all of the belief systems, values, and things that you've been told by society, your caregivers, your friends that you should have. And they are all the shoulds. And so if you think about what plagiarism is, it's taking somebody's belief system or their content and saying it's your own. And so that's what we're doing with belief systems every single day, especially those that are self-limiting. So the belief system that, oh, you know, I may be having this like amazing job that that I've been in for 20 years, but I've always really deeply loved and had this desire to start my own business and to really build a business around like the knitting that I do on the weekends.
Yes.
Well, the belief system that you can't do both or that you can't have success in one because it's a hobby-based business. First of all, I have some amazing, great hobby-based business clients like my client, Sarah Vettler, who created machine embroidery applique. That she builds beautiful quilts and is an incredibly successful business. So I encourage you to look at the possibilities as far as like, who are the people that are actually doing the thing that you say that you want to do? I just recently found a toy coach. Like there is a woman who coaches on how to build toys. Like if you want to build a toy, like that's the coolest thing. And it's like to think that, because that's not the traditional way, or that's not the way that you've been taught. Those are all belief systems. And so plagiarized programming is when you've adopted someone else's belief system as your own. And that's what keeps us from our zone of genius, especially because sometimes our egos, they love when we get a little bit of praise. Like, oh, well, I do spreadsheets and building processes really well. So I guess this is something that I could do. I do build websites pretty well. Like I can build a funnel. Like, I guess that's, you get praise and our egos love that validation. And the problem is that when we get so much of that, we start to lose ourselves. And that's how you get to the space of burnout and where you feel like you lost your identity and you're like, what is life? What is it for? And you're at that halftime space wondering like, how did I move the needle so far away when I thought I was so close on track. I thought I was doing all the right things.
Right. I talk about Joan, you talk about zone of genius. I talk about a sweet spot or a core competency. It's what, I started teaching when I was 13. And boy, when you teach music, and you have all of these people wanting to come in and be, the soloist. And it's like, I don't think so. But you have a great personality, and let's use what you have. And you end up using and finding that little area where somebody is great at and natural at. There's a lot of ways you can figure this out. There's a lot of strengths finders, all of these that'll give you clues, but it's also what you absolutely love to do and that gives you energy. So, and then you have to realize your time is your most valuable resource. And, I'm at the stage in my life where I want to do extra travel just for fun with my husband. And I'm in a window of time now that we do this. So, you decide what you want your life to look like. And there's a lot of people like me that you want to decide what your life looks like right now. And you want to make sure that you're putting in the things that you're actually able to live and not just work. And so, and make part of your work living. So that all of that comes together. And I think that's where, the confidence comes in, because you talk about a lot about that confidence and how important that is, and finding what drives you and what your uniqueness is. And that's what the market needs too. It needs the uniqueness, and it needs a really good, big idea. And so if you've got that and you know how to develop that, and what seems to be like your little sweet spot of what you can do is you can take something and help them magnify it, because you know about systems and you know how to put those together and how to encourage people in that process and how to make goals. You've got to have something that's very, very measurable. So part of this is where people, if they're going to do something, they need to start. They need to decide. And there's a lot of people that struggle with this decisiveness, like, well, should I do this? And then I talk to those people in another couple months, they're still saying, should I do this? And then I talk to them a year later and they've still not done anything. And then I talk to them another year later and they've not gotten off the starting block. So why do you think people really struggle with this? Is it just because of fear? Is it something else? What have you found? And how do people get beyond that?
So I love the conversation around decide. That's actually what I built my TED Talk around, was this word decide.
Right.
And if you want to, I get really literary and nerdy about words. And the word decide, it literally side, think of homicide, it means to kill or cut off. And the problem where most people have been, mostly including incredibly successful leaders, where they struggle to make decisions, is they're scared of making the wrong one.
Right.
And that's the biggest fear that I see stopping people, is they are scared, is the fear of being wrong. What if I make this decision and I fail? What if I make this decision and it hurts my family? Especially if you've built up some level of success in a certain field or industry or space, there is a fear, not so much of success, but actually of the loss of success. Of you may succeed at it, but you may lose something that you found valuable along the way. Right. And when you can allow yourself to sacrifice the fear that you're going to do it wrong, because our egos love being right. And that is the number one fear to start with, is what are you scared of being wrong about? Are you scared that maybe you think that this was the wrong path, or that maybe you've had this desire in your heart and then it doesn't really turn out as you thought? But the only way that you will be able to know what is true and right for you is actually to put that out there into the physical world. And then you get this amazing thing, the greatest F word, well, second greatest F word on the planet, feedback.
Yes. Oh, that's good. Thank you. Thank you. This is a G-rated, yes. G-rated podcast.
Yep. You get feedback, and feedback comes from when you put your creation out into the world and you birth it. And I like to think of anything, whether you're thinking of launching a business or leaving your current career or writing a book or speaking on stages, whatever it is that dream that's in your heart. I like to think of it like giving birth to a child. Like there is so many people abort their ideas before they even allow them to come into physical reality.
Right.
And when the process of birth, of the hard part with it being your ideas, you're not like, when it's a child, it just, all the cells are naturally aligning with divine intelligence to just be able to form a baby. With a business, you're like, you have to be the one to build the systems to put them together. However, there comes a place where how much do you trust yourself? So that's the second piece that I see where people stumble over, is not only the fear of being wrong, but then how much are they actually trusting themselves?
Right.
And a lot of times when they've lived into systems and lived into other people's plagiarized programming, they've been taught to not trust themselves.
Yeah. To trust somebody else's system. I think, you know what? That is the biggest takeaway. The biggest, I think, for many, from what we've just spoken about, is a lot of people are living in fear. They're afraid of taking that next step, thinking, oh, what if I fail? And it's not just what if I fail? What if I embarrass myself? There's a lot that comes into play there. And you need that feedback, though. It's not like just fail fast and just keep going and think about this and make an intelligent decision. You know what you're doing, please. Look at those strengths, look at your natural strengths, and look at skills that you can develop. I talk about developing skills too, because you can stay in the same place forever if you don't develop skills. But look at, all of the parts of that and just make a decision, move forward. And get off of those starting blocks and start moving, because it's just like, because I've worked with a lot of agents through the years, and an agent books you for different things, because I've been in the entertainment business, but they like trout that are swimming downstream. That's, to book. They're moving. And if you're not moving, you can't, a lot of times you can't even see what's to the side of you, because you're just stuck in that same place. So making a decision, at least move forward and see, kind of test the waters. I mean, I talk about side businesses, everything else, if you're going to talk about business, to kind of test the water. And those are safe places, very safe places. But make a decision and start stepping out. You've got the tools. Like so many people, they have the tools. You can start very, very basic. So
I have a belief. I believe, and I invite your listeners to try this one on, just like a pair of clothes. Like if you don't like it, like just, you try on a belief, see how it fits, see how it feels on you, just like a jacket. And if it doesn't feel good after a couple months, then, chuck the jacket, give it away, donate it. But I have this belief, and this may sound egotistical, but I believe that no matter what, I always make the right decision, no matter what. Because I too used to be paralyzed by that fear of making the wrong choice. And I know that that being in that state, you're in sympathetic nervous system. So you're not going to make the best, smartest decisions anyways, because you're in fight, flight, freeze, and you're currently frozen, stuck, that you're going to make the wrong decision. Right. Like what you said, Deborah, like move. So like making the right decision. And so I like to think of a decision as like you plant the seed and the roots ripple out. And there's no wrong way. They're all creating a tree. So you have the roots, and you can go in any one of those, and then you can always come back to the root and then go see which one is actually going to help build the strongest tree. But you are able, if you adopt the belief that you always make the right decision. Why I believe this is because no matter what, even if I make a mistake, even if I mess up, I know that I'm going to learn something from that mistake, that I'm going to grow from that, and that will provide me that glorious F word feedback with being able to say, okay, that didn't work, so I'm going to pivot this way. And, or that worked a little bit, so maybe I double down on that one piece that's actually working. And then explore and change certain variables, but you're not changing everything at the same time. So being able to make that just one decision and try on the belief just for a few months that you will always make the right decision, because no matter what, you will learn from whatever comes, whatever the external data is. And if it works out, then great. And if not, then you have that feedback and you can make the next best right decision.
Right. It's kind of like you're going to put on a little cloak of confidence. When you're thinking about your queen, I like the illustration of that. You can just put on your little cloak of confidence and run with that for a while, and then just say, you know what, I might need to just put on a different little cloak next time, but I've got it. And really what happens is you live up to that, and you live up to where, you can make that next decision based on what you've done, because you've learned, you've grown, and all of that. So do you think that's equated with some of the problem with some of our leadership today? Because there's a lack of really good leadership in many areas, in many companies. And you see this with teams that, they're disjointed and they're not communicating together, and there's a lot of this that happened now, especially when you have a lot of remote workers, and how do you bring a team now together that you used to have in a closer setting, and now you have people that my sons, two of my sons are that, want to choose to be able to work at least remote part of the time. And one is an attorney. They've now have a lot of freedom. So you want to be able to establish some of that. But how does this relate to your whole area of decisiveness and leadership? Because you talk about that a little bit in your messaging.
In order to make a clear, fully embodied decision, you have to take ownership of every decision that you make, whether it's the decision to wake up on a certain time, the decision to work remotely, the decision to not work remotely.
Right.
But every decision has to, consciously or unconsciously, we're always deciding. A lot of times we're just repeating the same decision, which is 95% of our subconscious programming. But what it takes is, especially with leadership, is extreme ownership. And the problem with most leadership today, and I've seen this in companies and I've seen this in government, is that there is a lack of ownership, and then there is a lot of blame, shame, and guilting and fear being that is driving people, rather than ownership, consciousness, and the power for us to be able to create and challenge existing systems. And there's a great paradigm, and I forget the psychologist who came up with this paradigm, but it's called the drama triangle. And it's one I regularly look at with my clients, because I see at what point in the drama triangle are they, and how can we flip that? So the three tiers of the drama triangle are the victim. And a lot of my clients, because they're high performers, they would rather die than be considered a victim. They may have had experiences in the past, but they're like, ew, victim, that makes me weak. But you will know if you're in the victim seat, if you are blaming other people, if you are complaining about your circumstances, because then you are a victim of your circumstances. Then there's the villain seat, which the villain seat is the one I see much more high performers go into, especially ones that have experienced childhood trauma, because the villain seat, they'd much rather, take the fault, and it's their fault for everything. But fault is not ownership as well. You can only take 100% ownership for your actions. Unfortunately, you cannot take 100% ownership for anybody else's actions, nor can you take even 10%. Like I had one client who I really had to have come to an awakening moment where I said, okay, you've been divorced for 10 years. Like, how long are you still going to be blaming yourself for your ex-wife's choices 10 years later? Like, you are not the reason why she doesn't have a job. She needs to start taking ownership over that fact. And then there's the role of the hero, which the hero is also what I translate as the codependent or the enabler. And they will sweep in and try to save the day. And the beautiful thing is, when you flip the pyramid on its head, the victim can become the creator of their circumstances when they take ownership. The hero, who's the enabler, can actually become the coach and can coach and guide and hold and facilitate strong boundaries, but they don't enable, they don't blur the lines as far as where their responsibility starts and ends. Like, they know that line, and they keep the client responsible, or the other person responsible for their own choices. And the third is one of my favorites. So the challenger can be, the villain can become the challenger. They can challenge the existing systems. They can challenge the way things have been done, and this is just how we do it sort of thing. Because when you're able to do that the challenger is the one who creates innovation. And
Mm.
that's how teams can become more creative and innovative.
Right.
But it all starts with this key point of ownership. Like you have to own
Right.
that you're in the victim mindset. You have to own that you're taking more than your fair share of responsibility. You have to own that you're stepping up and taking other people's responsibility and trying to swoop in and save them. Like
Right.
it all starts with ownership, and a simple linguistic reframe is just shifting from, oh, this is all happening to me, or this is all happening by me, to this is all happening for me. And when you start looking at life as everything is happening for you, including that employee, or including when your kid, says the mean thing to you and doesn't talk to you and does the thing, you're like, oh my gosh, really? You did that again? When you see, how is this happening for me? How is this allowing me to evolve and grow? Because that's where we as leaders get to ripple forth and change.
Right.
The change starts first with us. It ripples into our home, it ripples into our workforce, ripples into our community. But we have to look and examine from and through the lens of ownership of, how am I creating this circumstance? What is it about me that is allowing for this? What is it about my thought process? How am I feeling on a regular basis? Like, oh, I
Right.
can tell you, especially with having kids, like they give you some real reflections as far as like how you are. I just had a really big awakening with my son. He's 6, and he started saying, I have to work. And I was like, I started listening to his language and his emotions, and I was like, oh no.
Yeah, he's copying mom.
He's
How about that?
modeling. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so when I
Exactly.
shifted into like, oh, I get to go play. And he's like, what? You're going to go play and I don't get to be there for you? And I'm like,
Yeah.
yes, I'm
Yeah.
going to go play on a
Yeah.
podcast interview. I'm going to go play. And I shifted my language around it, and it livens the spirit and
Right.
brings more play and consciousness into it, instead of this like
Right.
have to mentality,
Right.
which is being in the victim corner of the drama triangle anyway.
Exactly. Exactly. Oh, it's just such great. We have covered so many things today. I love the triangle and the inverted triangle. All of those they're great visuals. And for anybody that's a visual, it's great for them to kind of re-listen to that and go over those principles. So, I mean, we could probably talk for another hour, but we really need to start summing this up a little bit. I would like you, like briefly, one thing that you want kind of to walk away with, what is one thing a listener can apply to their life? Just one thing. And then I will give you a chance to just say, how people can contact you. But I realize for everyone listening, all of your information will be in the show notes. So don't worry about it. They'll be able to contact you and see everything that you've done. But what is one thing? If people were going to finish listening to this and act upon with decisiveness, one thing.
I would say get wonderfully and radically curious about what lights you up.
Good. Wow.
Just walk through the day and look at what is lighting me up, and start to formulate a list over the coming week. What radically and wonderfully lights you up, and write it down. Write it. And if you're noticing, oh, wow, I don't have a lot of things that really radically and wonderfully light me up, then that's a sign that there's some growth. And if you're also looking at things that you think are supposed to wonderfully and radically light you up, but are not, then look at how you are thinking about that, how you are feeling about that. What beliefs are you bringing to the relationship, either with money or with your kids or with your spouse or with your job or with your business, whatever that relationship is. Look at how are you an active participant in that relationship, and how can you get curious to have that light you up again?
Wow. Great. I mean, that is a great takeaway. What lights you up? And if you don't have it, you might be burnt out, all of those things, but figure it out.
Yeah. And that's okay.
A step. Yeah, that's okay. Take that step of decisiveness. And that's a really great takeaway there. Thank you so much for that sharing. And thank you for being with us. How can people if people are just listening, they're not going to look at the show notes. If they're just listening, how can they reach you, Kimberly?
If you love this podcast, then
Mhm,
definitely, and you love podcasts like this, you can head on over to either of our podcasts. We have
mhm,
the Crown Yourself podcast, all about conscious leadership and reigning sovereignly,
mhm,
and the Communication Queens podcast, which is all about leveraging better communication, whether
mhm,
in your life or in how you're projecting your story out into the world for your
mhm,
personal brand.
mhm.
And if you love this conversation and would like to dive deeper personally, then head on over to crownyourself.com and just click the button that says work with me.
Good. Hey, easy, easy, easy.
Easy peasy.
All of those links will be in the show notes. So we'll make sure that they've got all of that information. So thank you so very much. I love doing what I'm doing. That's why I'm doing it. And it is just a blast, and love to be able to help other people move forward in their life. And I don't want anybody wasting anything. I want you to be able to maximize where you are in a lot of different areas. Make sure you're living life. That's really important, to make sure you're living life and you're not, I got to go to work, Mom. I'm only 6, but I got to go to work today. Oh my gosh.
Right.
Yes. They teach you a lot. And by the way, Kimberly, it never ends. Okay.
Oh, I'm
So
sure.
yes, I have adult children now. It never ends. So they continue to teach you a lot, but such a joy, such a joy. So it's been an absolute pleasure. And thank you everyone for listening. This was a delightful interview, and I hope you enjoyed every minute of it, and that you enjoyed some of the wisdom, as also some of the inspiration, because part of what I do is inspiring people. It's what, if I can help you just to say, yeah, I think I can do that. I think I can move on. I think I can crown myself. I think I can, take that little step and not be so fearful. It'll be all worth it. Thank you so much for the listening. I'm on at least once a week. I'm adding more podcasts, so make sure you follow them. And also you get on our newsletter. I write an article every single week, goalsforyourlife.com/newsletter. And you will get, if you're on that, you are going to get all of the podcasts as well. So you won't miss any. And make sure that you click in, because I have a lot of different interviews, as well as I speak a couple times a month. And of course, you want to see my husband. He's still very hunky. So, all right. So thank you so much for joining me. And I will see all of you, or hear, you'll hear from me again next time. So bye-bye for now.
Thank you for joining us. It is because of our wonderful listeners like you that we keep going strong week after week. We'd love it if you'd share and follow us to not miss a single show, and even write a review. You can also find all of our articles, products, and links at womenathalftime.com.